Okay. Okay, teachers, welcome to Educator's Edge, Enhancing Instruction. Today we're covering the Science TEK 4.13a, Structures and Functions of Plants. If you are watching this session asynchronously, please take a moment to pause and make sure you have all of these items available before you continue. And we will get started. So welcome. I am one of your two hosts today. I am Kristen Conrad, the elementary science specialist.
And I'm Amy Snyder, Science IST.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Our learning outcomes for this session is we hope that by the end of the session, you have a better understanding of this targeted hotspot TEK. We're going to analyze how this TEK is assessed, so you'll have a good understanding of what that looks like and how to prepare your students for that. You're going to experience a lab or two, and then review some instructional resources that you have available to help you as well. We do ask that as we move through this session, any questions you have, if you'll throw them in the chat. We want to make sure all the questions are addressed and we don't want you to forget them. But we do have a Q&A at the very end where we'll go through all the questions in the chat or any questions you may have. So we hope you guys have some good ones for us. And we're going to go ahead and get started here by looking at our historical data. The data is why we're here today. And so for looking at STAR data, you can see we're looking at TEK 5.13a, which is a readiness standard. And you can see that going from 2022 to 2025, we are consistently decreasing in our achievement in this standard, which is why it is now a hotspot TEK for us. In fourth grade, your standard is 4.13a, and so the only data we had for you for fourth grade was looking at last year's unit assessments. And so as a district, our percent proficient for this TEK was 53% on our unit assessments. So you can see that we need to try to step up our game when we're teaching this standard. So hopefully that's what we can help you do today. Just to give you, I meant to mention this, a little bit of clarification. The fifth grade standard is very similar to yours in fourth grade. It just includes plants and animals. So in fourth grade, you guys are looking specifically at plants. Third grade looks at animals, and then fifth grade puts them together. So we are going to start by having you unpack the standard. So I'm going to give you a minute to read the full TEK, and then these are the learning targets that we have listed in the curriculum to support this TEK. So I'm going to give you a quick minute to read this slide. And then I'm going to ask you if you will unpack the standard. So if you will identify the verb or verbs in the standard, and then identify the content piece within the standard. And if you're working with your teams to view this together, if you guys will have a discussion about what are the verbs and what is the content piece of the standard, and then how do the learning targets support those pieces. Well, let's take a look. Your verbs are explore and explain. And the content piece is how structures and functions of plants help them survive in their environment. And they give you specifics, waxy leaves and deep roots. I do want to take a quick minute to talk about explore. What does explore look like in your instruction? If students will explore how structures and functions of plants enable them to survive in their environment, what does that look like? What does that mean for instruction? And if you're working with your teams, if you guys will have a quick chat about that. Okay, so explore basically just means that students are going to have the opportunity to start uncovering this understanding and connection of structures and how those structures help the animals meet their or plants meet their needs through the functions of the structure. So when you're thinking about what instruction looks like in planning instruction, you really need to be thinking about providing opportunities for the students to explore. And then after they explore, follow up with the explain. Your learning targets support this standard by kind of breaking it down into specifics. So these learning targets are for you, the teacher. So in the first part of the curriculum, we start by students investigating the plant structure of a wax covering and how its function is to retain water. We also talk about how we investigate plant structures such as their deep roots and how those deep roots help support the plant and absorb water. And then finally, the students wrap it up by explaining how plant structures have specific functions that are essential for survival in the environment. So we kind of took the teak, broke it into three pieces, and made it a lot more specific for you, the teacher, so you know exactly what your outcome is for instruction. So next we're going to look at how this standard is assessed. This is what your unit assessment looks like. So I want to give you a minute to read over this test question and think about how this test question impacts instruction. Okay, so there is more to a waxy covering than just retaining water. So you want to make sure during instruction you're kind of covering it all. And when you look at your teacher clarifications in your curriculum, we do elaborate on this a little bit. So you just want to make sure that you have a variety of examples in science. That's the hardest part is you just have to kind of get them to understand the basic concepts well enough that they can apply it to as many different examples and situations as possible. And if you want, this is what it looks like on STAR. So when they move to fifth grade, and this was on this last 2025 STAR, and this was a regarding plants. So I just wanted you to get an idea of what it looks like when they go to fifth grade. So with questions regarding structures and functions, they typically will give you some background information. Even the question before in our unit assessment above the image, we give some background information, and that's to help provide some clues that the students can tap into because they're going to have to make some inferences. So in this case, they do tell you that the roots of the plants can pull water and nutrients from the root systems of other plants. So students have to kind of infer on a cause and effect relationship here to understand that because the Texas paintbrush is pulling nutrients away from other plants, it could potentially slow their growth to give the Texas paintbrush more room to grow. So they're pretty complex questions. Students really have to do some inferring and really understand what every structure of a plant does to help the plant survive in its environment. Okay, and I'm going to now hand it over to Amy, who's going to start modeling our lesson for you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm working out of a school today. So, hi teachers. I'm going to go through the model lesson for this TEK. Just some background information before we get started is that I'm going to go through all of the stages of the 5E lesson, but this is meant to span over 3 instructional days. So this lesson would not be completed in one class time. I'm just going through parts of it that you'll cover over the period of approximately 3 instructional days following our 5E framework. So our guiding question is, how do plant structures help plants survive in their environment? And so like Kristen mentioned, really the focus is to get kids to explore and explain the plant structures. So in order to do that, we want to expose them to as many different types of plants as possible. And so this is how you would introduce it with this guiding question: is how do these different types of structures help plants survive in their environment, and making the connection that plants live in all different types of environments, and that's why they have different structures that serve them in different ways. And so today you're going to be acting like scientists. You're going to be conducting a descriptive investigation, collecting your observations in your science notebook. And as we're learning, we really want you to focus on this big idea or this recurring theme of the idea of structure and function and the relationship between them. So just be thinking about that as we go through the lesson, and you would do the same with your students. So we're going to start off with our engage. So the engage is meant to present students with a science phenomena. So in this case, for this TEK, we're studying plant structures and functions. So our phenomena is going to be plants. And so you have a couple of different options. Really, of course, we want the students to observe live plants. And so you know that 4th grade is, we order plants through Carolina for all 4th grade teams in our district. So if you have not yet done so, be sure to do that. I sent a reminder email to all of these science leaders at the campuses. So most of our campuses have received those and signed up for the request form. And so you have access to this variety of plants from Carolina. I'm going to share my screen so you can see, because I'm going to perform some of these labs for you so you can see and you can follow along with me. If you have your plants, that would be great to have them out if you're on campus. But if not, I'll show you what the collection looks like if you've not yet received them. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen? Good, okay. So this is the collection of the plants that you will be receiving from Carolina. So there is a wide variety of different types of plants from different environments, all different types of structures. So this would be a really great way to get students engaged with the phenomena by introducing just one of the types of plants or more. So we can start off just by showing, for example, I could say, okay, let's take a look at this plant, and allow students to make observations about the leaves, about the stems, and about the roots. Because in some of the samples, you can even see the root systems are visible underneath here. So you can have them make observations of the plants that you have. You can have students touch the, here we go. You can have students touch the leaves that are available, making note of the different shapes of the leaves and the textures of the leaves and examining the roots. You could also gently take it out of the pot that it came in for them to observe the root systems. So that's one option when you're conducting your Engage. Another option is to purchase plants from HEB. You can also make observations on the playground at school of trees where they have the visible root systems, or also even pulling weeds from the playground or the yard at school, pulling weeds and being able to see the roots from there. So there's a couple of different options. Of course, for this teak, we want them to be exposed to as many different types of plants and types of structures as possible, but this is just to introduce the teak. So the Engage is just to get them to make those initial observations and just to get them asking questions about the structures. So when you're doing an Engage in their science notebooks, you could have them record the guiding question. So here my guiding question would be, how do plant structures help plants survive in their environment? So that's going to really anchor all of this instruction that we do over the course of these 3 days. Is we want to answer that question and apply it to a variety of different types of plants. So usually when we're doing an Engage, we highlight our I notice, I wonder protocol. And so you can present the students with the plant and ask, what do you notice? And they can record their observations in their science notebook. And then the I wonder is when they would generate a question. And so, for example, here we can say, what do you, trying to get it here, what do you notice about this plant? And so they can notice, oh, I see that the leaves have this bright red color. You can have them draw that in their notebook. They appear to turn or make curls. You can say that. I also see the roots underneath, and you can have them draw their observations. And then the I wonder would be the question. So they could say, I wonder why this plant has red leaves. How does that help the plant survive? So that would be an example of an Engage, is just to present your student with a plant or several plants from HEB, from the ones you're sent from Carolina, or on the playground, and just ask them to make observations, record in their notebook, and generate a question. Okay, so then we're gonna get into our Explore. So the Explore is gonna be the Roots lab investigation. So this is where I'm gonna have you, if you were able to gather the materials, if you can take those out. So what you're gonna need for the Roots lab is you will need 3 containers of soil. Let me see, get the best view for you here. We don't need that. There we go. So 3 containers of soil. There we go. And then you will also need 3 sheets of paper. So you can use copy paper or you can use notebook paper. But what you're going to do, and you'll want to do this in advance just to save time, because I know class time is limited. So you'll want to prepare one of each type of root structure per group. So the first sheet of paper, you're just going to roll up into a tube. So it'll make a long tube like this. And if you can follow along and do this with me, that way you have one thing prepped, but also you're able to experience the lab as you go so that you're ready to go when it's time to do this with kids. So the first one, you're just gonna roll, it almost looks like a paper towel roll. The second one, you'll do the same thing, but this time when you roll it up and you tape it, you're just gonna cut it in half. So it's gonna be short. It's gonna be half the size of the original. There's that one. So I'm gonna put those over there. And then for your third structure, you'll roll up the piece of paper and then tape it. And then at the bottom, you're gonna cut strips along the bottom. So that way it creates these long strips to resemble the root system. So it ends up looking like this, but you'll make cuts all the way to about halfway up the sheet of paper. And so I'll give you a minute or two to do that, to get your 3 root systems ready to go. Okay. Okay, and then next you're gonna need 75 milliliters total of water with food coloring. So we use blue, you can use any color, it just helps them make the observations a little bit easier when you add the food coloring. So you'll need 75 milliliters total, but it's going to be distributed amongst the 3 containers of soil. So you'll need about 25 milliliters in each cup. So I'm gonna divide up my 75 for 25 each. I'm just putting them in these smaller cups. So 25, 25, 25. And just so you know, as I'm setting this up, we created some teacher support videos for this lab that we linked in your 4th grade curriculum for this year. Since this was one of our hotspot teaks, we created videos to walk you through this setup. So since you're here, you won't need to view them, but if there's people on your team that were not able to attend, it would be great to share those with them because we walk you through this process so that you're ready and set up for success. I love seeing y'all on this side setting them up. That's awesome. So we have the 3 setups of the colored water. So now what you're going to have the students do is in their notebooks. Remember, this is a model. So they are modeling different types of root systems. So in your model, you want to have your students set up something like this. So I'm going to set these off to the side for now and show you my notebook. So here is my before. And so you always want to tell students, remember, when we are scientists and we're recording observations in our notebook, we always want to include labels. So we're going to label what the actual material is that we're using for the model, and then also what it represents as well. So here we have different paper tubes. So we have our long tube, our short tube, and then our tube that has the strips at the end. And those all represent different types of root systems. And so they would draw their root systems. And then once it's time to explore, what you're going to do is I'm going to set this aside. And the notebook examples are also linked in those teacher scripts and demo videos. So you'll have access to this within your curriculum as well. So I'm going to set that aside. So then you'll have your 3 containers of soil. And then what the students are going to do is they'll have the colored water. So there's 25 milliliters for each one. And so what you'll do is, and I think it helps just to have generate like a little hole in the soil to add the water. It just helps the roots settle in better. So I'm going to do that. And you can tell your students to do the same. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my root. So I have my long root. Oops, here we go. Okay, my shorter root. And then my root with the long strips. I'm going to make it. And you can tell your students to do the same because we want the roots to be in the soil just like they would in a real plant. Okay. All right, so then once I press that in, so then I'm going to add my water to each one. There's that one. Okay, can y'all see that? Okay, there we go. And just so you know, you could also use larger cups as well, smaller pieces of paper, use more water if needed. It's what works best for you and your students. And this can also be completed over the course of a day. Like you can make observations the next day and they can update their drawings. So I'm going to add the colored water to each of my 3 cups. Okay. And then I'll allow it to sit for 1 minute. So you'll set a timer in your classroom, or you can have the students use their stopwatch to set the timer for 1 minute. And then once that minute is complete, then they will then draw their observations in their notebook from the different types of roots. So I'm going to shift these over. Okay, so in their notebook, then they would draw their after pictures, and then they can draw whatever color of food coloring that you use. They would draw how far the water traveled to show how much got absorbed through the root systems. And again, these notebook examples are also linked in the teacher support script, so you have those as well. And this is something you could also just leave out or on the windowsill or wherever, and you can make observations the next day during science to see how the water levels changed as well. So this is just meant to get students exploring how does root shape and root structure impact absorption of water. Okay, so that's our explore. So now we're going to get into our explain. So for the explain, you have some options. I'm going to open up the slides here. There we go. Can you see my explain slides? Okay, perfect. So there's some different options that are available for the explain. So you have in your curriculum document, the way that this learning target is organized is into an exemplar 5E. So you're given the engage, which we talked about earlier, which is giving the students a sample of a live plant. And then your explore is the roots lab. And then your explain, you're given these slide decks. So they're PowerPoint slide decks for cacti structures and functions. And so both slide decks have a bunch of different pictures of all kinds of different structures and lots of information about functions of those structures specifically to cacti. So you have those resources that you can use. Also, Savas has resources for plant structures and functions that you can access through the digital platform. So you can utilize the key ideas presentations, the key ideas activity, which is the one that students have in their consumable textbook, and also the key ideas video. Another good idea, though, is to utilize your Carolina plants that you have. And so to distribute those amongst the grade level, so depending on how many teachers that you have at your campus, you can like create a rotation system where Miss Conrad's class has these 2 plants for this day, and that day your students are doing research on that particular plant. And so you can create like a shared slide deck where they're all putting in noticings of the structures and then researching the functions and environments of each individual type of plant. Because really, for this TEAC, we want them exposed to as many different types of plants and structures and as functions as possible. So that's just the variety of different ways that you can explain with this learning target. We also have this notebook support for specifically cacti structures and functions that I will show you. Oop. Come back here. Sorry, I'm gonna have to reshare because I went out of the share. There we go. Okay, can you see my screen with the notebook? Okay, perfect. So this is going to be a sample of what you can utilize in the science notebooks for the explain. And so after going through those slide decks, we kind of went through all the different types of cacti and noted their structures and particular functions, and then just took out the big ideas from those slide decks. And so this is something that you can have your students draw in their notebooks and highlight those definitions that go over some of the really important structures and functions on cacti. And this is also linked in your curriculum under the explain as an additional support. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to get into the elaborate, which is another lab. It's the waxy coverings lab. So for this one, if you'll give me a moment, I'm going to get the materials. Okay. So for this one, you will need 2 sponges. You will need 3 sheets of wax paper that are big enough to where the sponge can sit on top of it. And you'll also need either a triple beam balance or a digital scale to use to measure mass. And then you will need 2 graduated cylinders, or I used a beaker, just whatever you have available, 2 graduated cylinders or beakers of 50 milliliters of water. So those are the materials that you need for the waxy coverings elaborate. And then here is my balance. Okay, so similarly to the Roots Lab, we are creating a model to represent a type of plant structure. And so specifically for this one, we're focusing on waxy coverings on cacti stems. And so you'll tell your students you're going to be given these materials and you're building a model. And a model is something that we use in order to study something in real life. And so just like with the Roots Lab, we're going to have them draw the model in their notebook and also label what that model represents. And so I'll show you my notebook example. And so you would designate one of the sponges as sponge A, and then the other sponge as sponge B. And something important to note is this would be carried out over 2 days because it would take some time for us to see a change in the mass. And so just since your window, you only have technically on the UAG, there's 3 instructional days for this. So you could potentially do this as a demo or with the students in groups, but just make sure that you do reserve those 2 days. So it shouldn't take long to start or to collect your data, but you will need the time, the 2 days. So they'll draw their model. So we have sponge A and we have sponge B. And you would tell the students that in our model, our sponge represents the stem of the cacti. And our wax paper is going to represent the waxy coverings. Okay. So again, I'm going to show, so the before picture is just the sponge and just the waxy covering. So it's going to look like this. So we have sponge A is going to have the waxy covering on the top and on the bottom. And then sponge B is just going to have the waxy covering on the bottom only. And so you can tell the students we are going to be collecting data in order to measure how well that our waxy covering keeps the water in the stem. And so you can potentially ask them, okay, how would I measure, how could I collect data to figure out how much water is left in the stem and then generate student responses from there? But ultimately they're going to be collecting the mass. And so they would then record the data table in their notebook. So we're going to take the mass of sponge A with the waxy covering on day 1 and the mass of sponge B without the waxy covering on day 1. And then the following day, we'll take the masses on day 2 and then find the difference. And so this would be the data table that they would record in their notebooks. And again, this is in your curriculum. We created these support videos for you for the setup and carrying out the activity along with the notebook link. So these pictures are in the curriculum, just so you know. Okay, so then that's the collecting data piece. So then what you're gonna do, so we have sponge A, sponge B, and then we have our 50 milliliters of water. So now I'm gonna pour my 50 milliliters. Oops. There we go. On sponge A. And a little bit might seep onto the wax paper, and that's okay. We just want to try to contain it on the wax paper as much as possible. So there's sponge A. And then I'll pour my 50 milliliters on sponge B. Okay. All right. So now you'll take the mass of both of the sponges with the wax paper. And so I'm going to take the mass. So here's my digital balance. Zero out. Okay. So I would take the mass. So 56.3 grams, I would record that in my notebook for day 1. So 56.3. And then the next one, 55.2. And it's okay if they're a little bit different because remember, we're focusing on the difference. So how much water was lost. And so it's okay if they're a little bit different in the masses. We're really going to focus on the difference on the second day. So you would have the students record the masses in their data table. There we go. So they record the masses in their data table here for day 1. And then you will have them place the waxy covering of the leaf or the waxy covering on their cactus stem for sponge A. And so we're figuring out, is that going to affect the mass of the water lost in any way? And then they would collect the data on day 2 by measuring the mass and then finding the difference and come to the conclusion that in sponge A with the waxy covering, that serves as a barrier to water loss by evaporation. And so the mass of sponge A was higher than sponge B. And so we would then conclude that the waxy coverings, the structure of the waxy covering, the function or the purpose is to keep the water in the plant, and it helps the cacti survive in a dry environment. So that would be your elaborate. Okay. And then lastly, your evaluate. I'm going to share one more time. There we go. Okay, can you see my evaluate resources? Good. Okay, so for the evaluate, you have a couple of different options as well. So there is an I have, who has structures and functions game that you can use for your students. You can print those out and have them review in groups. There is an exit ticket within Savas that you can utilize as your evaluate for the learning target. And there's also a quiz in Savas that you can utilize as an evaluate. So there's a couple of different options you can use. Also, just continuing to utilize the Carolina plants and incorporating them into your evaluate could be another idea as well. And that was all the stages of the 5E. Again, that's not meant to be completed in one science instructional day. It's over the course of the 3 days, but that follows all of the parts of our 5E framework. Okay, so this is what we took a screenshot of what it looks like within your curriculum. And so within your curriculum resources in Big Idea 2 for plants, you're going to see the learning targets. And then you'll see here is the exemplar 5E. And so if you click that, it'll take you to a PowerPoint that's going to have all of the resources within that PowerPoint. So you'll have your engage, you'll have your roots lab with the script and the video, and you'll have those PowerPoint presentations for the cacti structures and functions. So you'll see here, these are all of your links. So we have the teacher script and the teacher support videos that'll help you to make sure that you're hitting the key points for instruction for that learning target with each of those labs. And then we also link the notebook examples if you want your students to utilize those as well. And then the structures and functions game is linked there as well. And then all of those Savas resources are linked at the bottom, so you know how to access them. It's topic 7, experience 1. Okay, the next part is the teacher clarifications. So within your curriculum document, under each big idea, there is a section called the teacher clarification section. And this is super important because in the teacher clarifications, we'll give definitions, we will give, sometimes there's visuals in there, and it really allows you to target what exactly the TEK covers and vocabulary that the TEK uses. So for this particular learning target, we give some background information of the specific parts of a plant that are crucial that the students know and their functions as well. So I'll give you a minute to just read through that. That way you have the background knowledge as you're going to carry out this 5E. Okay. Okay. And then the instructional resources that are available for you to support this learning target. So we have our NISD Living Science. And I'm super happy to say, you may have gotten an email from me, but I'm super happy to share that almost all of our schools, fourth grade teams, have requested plants. We're waiting on less than 10. So that is awesome. So your plants, hopefully, if you don't have them already, they are on their way. But the way that Living Science works is that you submit a request form, which I then will send whoever submitted the form from your team, I will send them the voucher code, which you would then use to arrange the shipping or delivery to your campus directly with Carolina. And in the email, I give you instructions on how to do that. And this is a picture of an example of the different types of plants that you'll receive. It does vary on the specific species of plant, but you will get a variety with different structures found in different environments. And so we definitely want to get our kids to observe as many live plants as possible when we're carrying out this learning target. And then we could also always mention earlier, you can observe plants on the playground or in the yard at school and pull weeds from school. So this is a picture of when we did that at a campus. And so they can observe even from this, the root systems and the leaves and the stems and the different structures of the plants. Just of course, be mindful and let the kids know that there's areas where we're not going to pull plants from in school gardens and things like that. Okay, and then supporting diverse learners, providing them with visuals. And so this is why we included our notebook examples to support this TEK so that students see the structures and functions in real life, but also how that can look on paper as well. And then being able to associate a visual with the vocabulary word and being able to experience these structures and functions, also using the models as well. So all of it really goes into this idea of the 3D learning where they're getting their hands on the materials, they're doing scientific practices like collecting observations and recording and analyzing their data in their notebooks, and they're working with real life phenomena and connecting that learning to something in real life, in this case, plants. We also included in the PowerPoint the slide decks that have for your explain that have all of the structures and functions, some support with the visual non-glossary. So this is something we're starting to include in our science curriculum. So we're working on incorporating these as much as possible, but this is a really great support. The visual non-glossary will give you the academic vocabulary word and provides images or pictures. And of course, they try to limit the amount of words that are on the image just so we can have the students associate that word with something that they experience in the real world. So it's great for really any students, but especially your ELL students. Okay. And then providing sentence stems and frames. So we gave an example here on the slide and also included sentence stems in the scripts that we provided for these labs. So you'll see sentence stems that they can include in their notebook when they're trying to explain their learning. Okay. All right, is that handed over to Kristen?
Excellent job, Amy. Thank you very much. Definitely bringing back memories of virtual teaching and learning. So thank you very much. Okay, we're just going to open it up to anyone who has questions about the TEAC, about the curriculum, about the lab, any and all questions about reserving your plants. What questions do you guys have for us? All right, I was counting for wait time. Okay, well, I'm going to take that as a positive that we just nailed it. If you do end up having any questions, feel free to, very good, reach out to us. We are happy to help. Okay. Oh, good to know. Amy will follow up with you about a voucher.
Yes, I will follow up with that one. Well, Powell, thank you. Okay.
Okay. Well, and in that case, I'm going to stop recording. If you are a live participant, please wait just a minute because we're going to move to your attendance and feedback form. If you are watching this asynchronously, you will go and take a quiz to get your teacher choice credits. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.